Indeed, God is beautiful, and he loves beauty. That is a quote that hits you right at the very beginning of the material we're diving into today.
It really does.
It's a hadith, a saying attributed to the Prophet Muhammad. And honestly, it feels less like a strict religious instruction and more like, well, a universal key. It kind of unlocks this entire conversation we are about to have.
Yeah, I completely agree. It sets the stakes immediately. Because when you hear that the idea that God actually is beauty, it fundamentally changes how you approach the physical world around you.
Right, because making something beautiful isn't just, interior decoration at that point.
Exactly. It's an act of worship. It's an act of reaching out to the divine. And today, we're going to see how that very specific drive for beauty actually managed to bridge one of the most hostile divides in human history.
And hostile is definitely the operating word there. Because when most of us think about the history of the Mediterranean, specifically the Middle Ages, let's say from the 10th to the 16th centuries, we have a very specific, almost like a Hollywood movie playing in our heads.
Oh, for sure. Lots of chainmail and dramatic speeches.
Right. We see the Crusades. We see the Reconquista in Spain. We picture these glorious, bloody naval battles. Basically, we see a massive clash of civilizations.
We are so conditioned to view the medieval relationship between Islam and Christianity as this perpetual binary state of war. Us versus them, cross versus crescent, fortress Europe against the Islamic East. And look, I am not going to sit here and say the wars didn't happen.
Right. I mean, the violence was very real.
It was absolutely real. But if you only look at the battlefields, you completely miss the actual texture of life. You miss the story of how people actually lived, how they traded, and how they created things together.
And that is exactly the mission of this deep dive. We're digging into a really fascinating, incredibly dense collection of research titled The Medieval Mediterranean Between Islam and Christianity, Cross-Pollinations in Art, Architecture, and Material Culture. It's edited by Sammy Luigi Di Giosa and Nikolaos Verzidis. And let me tell you, this is not about how sultans fought kings.
No, it really isn't. This is about how a bowl, a carpet, a bottle of oil, or even a stone column moved between these two supposedly separate worlds. It is about a concept the editors call the aesthetic space.
I love that term, aesthetic space. It sounds almost sci-fi, but it is actually very grounded. Let's unpack this immediately before we even get into the physical objects. What does aesthetic space actually mean in this context?
So think about it this way. Dogma, religious rules, strict theology, political allegiance, all of that creates borders.
Right.
It creates walls. It very clearly defines who is in and who is out. But beauty, art, material refinement, that creates what scholars in the source material call affective proximity.
Effective proximity, meaning it brings people closer emotionally.
Exactly. The core argument here is that the appreciation of beauty allowed these two rival faiths to intermingle in ways that politics just never would have permitted. Like, a Christian could look at an Islamic textile and admire the weave, the color, the sheer luxury of it, without necessarily converting to Islam or feeling like a traitor. Yeah. The aesthetic space is essentially this zone where judgment is suspended in favor of admiration.
So beauty transcends all the heavy baggage. It's like a demilitarized zone for the eyes.
That is a perfect analogy. A demilitarized zone for the eyes. And to see this zone in action, the researchers use a methodology called microhistory.
Microhistory, then that sounds like we're taking a microscope to the historical timeline.
We basically are. Instead of macrohistory, which deals with the grand rise and fall of empires and these broad, sweeping generalizations, we are looking at the story of specific, tangible objects. We're tracing individual choices.
Like tracking a single package across the world, but in the 12th century.
Precisely. We're asking questions like, why did a priest in Italy want a book that looked like it came from Cairo? Or why did a Muslim sultan build his own tomb using stones that had hardcore Christian theology carved right into them?
That is wild.
Right. When you zoom in that close, the hard borders on the map just start to dissolve.
I feel like we are conditioned to think of these medieval borders as rigid iron curtains. You're on this side, you're safe, you cross the line, you are deep in enemy territory.
But the medieval Mediterranean was just not like that. It was a fluid network. It was a sea of connectivity. As we go through these sources today, I want you to really try to imagine a world where a Christian church is decorated with Islamic bowls and the holiest Christian relics are wrapped in Muslim silks.
Okay, it sounds like we need to completely reorient our mental maps for this. So let's just jump right into the first segment. Let's talk about this aesthetic space and the flow of objects. Because you mentioned bowls in churches just now, and that sounds, well, to a modern ear, it sounds like someone made a huge mistake.
It really does, doesn't it? But it was surprisingly common. We are looking at research here by Maria Born-Pudaki, specifically focusing on Venetian Crete.
Okay, great.
Right. Now, keep in mind, Crete is this massive island, strategically smack in the middle of all the major trade routes. It's a Venetian colony at this time, so it is Catholic-ruled, but the local population is largely Greek Orthodox. And on top of all that, it's trading constantly with the Islamic world.
So it's the ultimate crossroads, a total melting pot.
A total melting pot. And in the late medieval period, Born-Pudaki found something fascinating in the local church architecture. They call them immured bacini.
Immured bacini. Okay, I have to be honest, that sounds like a delicious pasta dish, but I know it's not. What exactly are we looking at?
No pasta involved, unfortunately. Immured just means embedded in a wall, and bacini refers to ceramic bowls.
Got it.
So picture a Christian church, could be Orthodox or Catholic. It has the stone facade, very solemn, very sturdy. But embedded right into the exterior walls, high up where everyone can see them, are these incredibly colorful, glazed ceramic bowls. And here's the kicker. Many of them are Islamic ceramics.
Wait, so they're taking bowls, like literal dinnerware made by Muslims, often featuring Islamic styles and patterns, and they are cementing them into the holy walls of a Christian church.
That is exactly what they are doing.
That is crazy. We have to ask the obvious question then. Why? Why on earth would you put the supposed enemy's dinner plates on your literal house of worship? Was it some kind of power statement, like, we conquered you so we are taking your bowls as trophies? Or was it some progressive, hey, we're all the same message?
It's a great question, but the research suggests it wasn't really theological synchronization. They definitely weren't trying to say Islam and Christianity are one. And it wasn't necessarily a triumphalist conquest thing either. It was far more practical than that, and it goes right back to that concept of the aesthetic space.
Practical is what way?
It was about the glazed versus plain aesthetic. See, local pottery in Crete or mainland Greece at the time was often unglazed. It was plain terracotta.
Like a standard flower pot.
Exactly. It was functional, matte, and usually just brown or dull red. But these Islamic bowls, coming from Mamluk Egypt, or later coming from Spain, they were glazed, they were incredibly shiny, they had vivid colors, deep blues, bright greens, and lusterware that just caught the Mediterranean sun perfectly.
Oh. So it was about the bling. It was about catching the light.
In a way, yes. It was entirely about visibility and status. If you are building a church, you want it to be beautiful. You want it to shine. You want it to reflect the light of God, literally and metaphorically. These Islamic bowls provided color and reflection that local Greek materials simply could not match at the time.
That is so interesting.
Right, because when that bowl crossed the sea, it lost its specific religious identity. People stopped seeing this as a Muslim bowl, and it gained a completely new identity. This is a beautiful, expensive, exotic object that reflects the sun.
It's like the object gets laundered of its ideology just by moving geographically. The Islamicness of the bowl evaporates, and only the beautifulness remains.
That's a really great way to put it. The aesthetic quality completely neutralizes the political origin. And Born-Pudaki's research really highlights Crete's role here. It wasn't just a Venetian outpost, it was a massive hub connecting Mamluk Egypt, Muslim Spain, and the rest of Europe. These bowls are physical, cemented proof of a trade network that frankly did not care about religious wars. They cared about supply and demand. If the Mamluks make the shiniest bowls, the Christians are absolutely going to buy them for their churches.
And I assume this intense trade wasn't limited to just ceramics. I mean, if they're embedding bowls in walls for the shine, what else are they trading for the sake of luxury?
Textiles, and this is a huge one. We have a fascinating chapter by Ana Cabrera Lafuente that looks at Andalusi textiles. Now, Andalusi refers to Al-Andalus, which is Muslim Spain.
Okay, Muslim Spain. High-quality stuff, I imagine. I feel like Andalusi's silk was probably the Italian leather of the 13th century.
It was the absolute gold standard. Literally, they were often woven with actual gold thread. But Lafuente points out a massive misconception in the history of all this. For a very long time, historians and museum curators would find these high-quality silks in European churches and just automatically assume, oh, it's nice, it must be from Muslim Spain. They labeled everything Andalusi.
So they were giving the brand name to everything, regardless of whether it was actually from there or not, like calling every tissue a Kleenex.
Exactly like that. It just became a generic term for high quality. But new research using carbon dating and deep technical analysis of the weave itself shows it is a much more complex web. These textiles were moving along pilgrimage routes, not just standard trade lines.
Okay.
But here is the most striking part of her research, and this really challenges that clash of civilizations narrative we talked about. These textiles were often used to wrap Christian relics.
Relics. Wait, we're talking about the bones of saints, pieces of the true cross, like the holiest of the holy objects.
The absolute holiest objects in Christendom. Take the San Isidoro Church in Leon, Spain, for example. You have these ornate reliquaries containing the physical remains of saints' objects that believers thought could literally channel divine power, and they are swathed in silks woven by Muslim artisans.
Wow.
And here is the detail that really gets me. These silks are often covered in Arabic calligraphy.
It seems wildly contradictory. Did the Christians know? Could they read the Arabic?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but often it just didn't matter. Again, enter the aesthetic space. The sheer quality of the fabric, the undeniable luxury of it is what signaled reverence. You don't wrap a revered saint in cheap burlap. You wrap them in the absolute finest silk available on the market.
Right.
And if the finest silk comes from a Muslim workshop in Granada or Baghdad, then that is exactly what you use. The sanctity of the relic required the highest aesthetic honor, completely regardless of who wove the cloth or what language was written on it.
So the material quality completely trumped the religious origin. It implies that being holy has a specific look, and that look was entirely shared across the Mediterranean.
That is the key takeaway here. It challenges the whole conquest narrative. It wasn't just, we beat them and took their stuff. It suggests a deeply shared culture of luxury. A Christian king and a Muslim sultan shared the exact same taste. They both agreed on what power and holiness looked like, and that look was very often Islamic in origin. The visual language of power in the medieval Mediterranean was, in many ways, an Islamic visual language.
That connects perfectly to the next segment of the research, because it's not just about pretty objects or luxury goods for the rich. It is about deeply shared knowledge. It's about the literal stuff you need to actually practice your religion on a daily basis. And this brings us to a story that I honestly found mind-blowing when I was reading the sources. The balsam of Mataria.
Ah, yes. Hani Hamza's research. This is an absolute classic example of pragmatism beating dogma. This is where the rubber meets the road, or rather where the oil meets the forehead.
So set the scene for us. What exactly is this balsam, and why is it so incredibly important?
So we are talking about a specific type of plant, a balsam tree, that produced a very specific resin or oil. In the Christian tradition, specifically the Coptic and other Eastern churches, this oil was absolutely essential. It was used to make chrism, which is the holy anointing oil.
Okay.
You need chrism for baptism. You need it for the ordination of new priests. You need it to consecrate new churches. Basically, without this specific oil, legally speaking, within the church, you cannot perform the sacraments. The entire mechanism of Christian salvation literally grinds to a halt without it.
Okay, so incredibly high stakes. This isn't just nice perfume. This is the literal fuel for the religious engine.
Very high stakes. But here is the massive catch. By the medieval period, this specific plant only grew effectively in one single garden in the entire world.
Let me guess. Not in Rome.
Yeah, no.
And not in Constantinople.
Not in Rome, not in Constantinople. It grew in Mataria, which was a suburb of Cairo down in Egypt.
Which was under
Mamluk rule.
Muslim rule. So the Christian church, in order to perform its most sacred fundamental rites, was entirely dependent on a supply chain that was totally controlled by the Muslim sultan.
Precisely. And the Mamluks absolutely knew it. They controlled the production of a substance vital for Christian salvation. Now, if you stick to the traditional clash of civilization script, you would think, oh, the Sultan would just burn the garden to the ground or cut off the supply to cripple the Christian faith.
Right, strike a massive blow against the enemy.
But they didn't do that at all.
They monetized it.
They absolutely monetized it, and they used it as a brilliant diplomatic tool. It became a legend. The balsam of Mataria was famous throughout Europe and the Middle East. And what is really fascinating is the blend of lore surrounding this garden. The Christians believed the garden was watered by a miraculous spring that the Virgin Mary used when the Holy Family fled to Egypt to escape King Herod.
Right, so for Christians, this is deeply sanctified ground. It's a major holy site.
Exactly. But the Mamluks, the Muslim rulers, were the caretakers of this Christian holy site. They actively maintained the garden. They organized the harvesting of the oil. Hani Hamza's research shows that this wasn't just a simple commodity being traded, it was heavy diplomacy. Sultans would gift small, precious vials of this oil to European kings or even directly to the Pope.
Wow.
It shows such a complex, layered relationship. It's like the Sultan is saying, you are my enemy, technically, but I control the literal keys to your religious rituals, and I am going to use that leverage to keep you talking to me. But I'm also going to protect the site because it's valuable to me, too.
It is the ultimate frenemy situation. I hate you, but I desperately need your holy oil. I hate you, but I really like your diplomatic gold.
It proves that the economic and ritual ties were so much stronger than the ideological divide.
And it goes even deeper than just trade and ritual. It goes to the very look of knowledge itself. We have another incredible case study here by Alison Oka about book bindings. Now, this is something that actually affects us even today when we think about books. Being a massive book lover, this one really resonated with me. Because we all think of the classic old scholarly book. You picture dark leather, gold tooling, maybe a protective flap on the edge. It just screams old world Europe to us.
Right. If you picture a quintessential Renaissance book sitting in a beautiful library in Florence or Venice, you are actually picturing something that looks very, very Islamic.
Really? Still?
Yes, because before this period, European books, what we call Gothic books, were extremely heavy. They had thick wooden boards for covers. They were clunky. They had big, heavy metal clasps to keep them shut. They were basically meant to sit on a heavy wooden lectern and just stay there.
Like a chained library book.
Exactly. But in the Islamic world specifically, the Mamluk and Ottoman empires, they had developed an entirely different, much more advanced technology for books. They used pasteboards, which are layers of paper glued together instead of thick wood. It was so much lighter. They used incredibly fine leather. They pioneered gold tooling, which is stamping intricate gold geometric patterns directly into the leather. And they used the envelope flap that folds over the front to protect the pages.
And the Italians saw this and just said, we want that.
Exactly. As the Italian humanists started reviving classical knowledge, translating Plato and Aristotle, they wanted a completely new look for this new wave of learning. They did not want the clunky, heavy Gothic style that was heavily associated with what they saw as the Dark Ages. They wanted sophistication. And to them, the high culture of the East, the Islamic world, visually represented that intellectual sophistication.
That is so interesting. So the physical vehicle for the European Renaissance, the actual physical book itself, was technologically and aesthetically an Islamic import.
The container of the knowledge was Islamic, even if the text inside was Latin or Greek. Alison Ota traces exactly how these specific bookbinding techniques migrated across the sea from Cairo and Istanbul straight into Venice. It's just another amazing example of how the aesthetic, the cool factor, if you will, completely overrode any religious prejudice. To be modern, to be seen as a true intellectual in Renaissance Italy, meant holding a book that looked like it came straight out of the Sultan's personal library.
I love that so much. It's literally like buying the latest tech today. It's entirely about the design language. You want the sleekest, most advanced design completely regardless of where it was invented or who manufactured it.
It really is. And sometimes this intense mixing of design languages creates something that is truly baffling to historians, a hybrid object that completely defies simple categorization.
Which perfectly brings us to segment 3, the hybrid object. When three hands touch one artifact, we're looking at a very specific artifact found at Mount Athos, specifically at St. Paul's Monastery. And this thing sounds like a complete puzzle.
It is a massive puzzle. This is research done by Nikolaos Phryzidis and Paskalis Angroudis. This object is, well, the best word for it is a survivor. It's a composite object.
Describe it for the listener. What does it actually look like?
So imagine a metal candlestick. The base of it is beautifully worked metal. It features a prominent double-headed eagle and various astrological symbols. Now this base is Seljuk. It comes from Muslim Anatolia, probably made in the 12th or 13th century.
Okay, so a Muslim-made candlestick base.
Right. But attached firmly to the top of it is a cross, a distinctly Venetian Catholic cross.
Okay.
And the whole composite thing is currently sitting in a strict Orthodox monastery on Mount Athos, and it was used in Greek liturgy.
That is absurd. A Muslim base, a Catholic top, and an Orthodox home. It is like the turducken of religious artifacts.
That is, well, that's a very vivid image, but yes.
Yeah.
It physically embodies the microhistory of the entire region. This object isn't just one thing, it is a literal collision of three distinct cultures.
How does that even happen practically? Do they just find a base, weld a cross onto it, and call it a day?
Essentially, yes. But the analysis goes so much deeper than the physical joining. The real question is, why did they keep the base? Why didn't the Christians just melt it down and forge a properly Christian base for their cross? And the answer lies in that symbol on the base, the double-headed eagle.
Now wait, I know the double-headed eagle is a distinctly Byzantine symbol. It represents the Roman Empire looking both east and west. Right? You still see it on flags in the region today.
That is the Byzantine and Orthodox interpretation, yes. It is imperial. It represents the divine authority of Constantinople. But in the Seljuk context, the Islamic context where the base was originally made, the double-headed eagle was also a very common symbol. But there it was cosmological. It represented power, sure, but often in an astrological or talismanic sense. It was viewed as a protector figure.
Oh, so you have a symbol that easily passes in both cultures.
Exactly. This is the absolute key to its survival. The visual overlap allowed the object to survive the transition between religions. A Christian monk looks at this candlestick base and sees the Byzantine eagle, his own imperial heritage. A Muslim artisan looks at the exact same base and sees a Seljuk cosmological symbol. Because the symbol was completely ambiguous, or rather, because it held a shared yet different meaning for both deities, the object could be seamlessly repurposed rather than destroyed. It could just pass.
It is like linguistic code switching, but for physical objects. It speaks whatever visual language the viewer happens to speak.
Perfectly said. And that ability to code switch visually is the only thing that saved it. It allowed a Seljuk object to literally hold up a Venetian cross on a Greek altar. It proves that these cultures were not hermetically sealed bubbles. They were incredibly porous. Things constantly leaked through. And sometimes things didn't just leak through. They were completely misunderstood by the people who found them. And that misunderstanding is the only reason they survived the centuries.
Speaking of things being misunderstood, and this is honestly my favorite story in the entire collection of sources we read that we have to talk about the marble slabs. This story, I mean, of all the stories we've covered, this one feels the most ironic. It feels like a comedy scriptwriter wrote it.
Oh, this is the ultimate historical irony. This is the story of the marble slabs of 1166.
Segment 4, Misunderstanding is Preservation. Let's dive in. What exactly are these slabs?
These are massive, incredibly heavy marble inscriptions. Originally, they were set up inside the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople during the height of the Byzantine era, and they contain the text of a very specific, incredibly dense theological decree. It's from a church council held in 1166 that was furiously debating the meaning of a phrase from the Gospel of John, "My Father is greater than I."
My Father is greater than I. Okay, that is heavy theology.
Extremely heavy. It is fundamentally about the nature of Christ. Is he totally equal to God the Father? Is he somehow subordinate? The council ultimately decided on a specific Orthodox interpretation that Christ is equal in his divinity, but inferior in his humanity. Now, the minute details don't matter as much as the fact that this text is hardcore, uncompromising Christian dogma. It is explicitly Trinitarian. It rigidly defines the nature of Jesus as the Son of God.
Okay, so massive Christian text carved into marble on a wall in the Hagia Sophia. Standard Byzantine stuff.
Standard. Until the year 1453, the Ottomans conquer Constantinople. The Hagia Sophia is converted into a mosque. Now, usually you would expect the new Islamic rulers to smash these slabs to dust, right?
Yeah.
The text completely contradicts Islamic theology, which views Jesus strictly as a mortal prophet, not the literal Son of God. God has no partners. That is the absolute central tenet of Islam.
Right. So technically, to the new rulers, this marble slab is pure blasphemy.
But they didn't smash it. Fast forward a century or so. These massive slabs are moved from the Hagia Sophia, and where do they end up? They end up decorating the mausoleum, the grand tomb of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent.
Wait. Let me process this. You're telling me the tomb of one of the absolute greatest Muslim sultans in history is decorated with huge Byzantine slabs proclaiming the literal divinity of Christ?
Yes. The longest lapidary Byzantine inscription in existence ended up protecting the body of the Caliph of Islam.
How? Why would they do that? That seems completely impossible.
That is exactly the question the researchers asked. Forik Bilici and Helene Fragaki call this phenomenon misunderstanding as preservation. The most likely explanation is that the Ottoman architects simply could not read the Byzantine Greek theology. Or, perhaps more accurately, they just didn't care what the words actually meant. They cared deeply about what the words look like.
They just really liked the font.
In a way, yes. They viewed the script as deeply ancient. There is this widespread medieval concept of talismanic power. The sheer otherness of the text, the fact that it was ancient, incomprehensible Greek, beautifully carved into high-quality marble, gave it a profound sense of magic, of lingering power. They likely saw it as spolia, reused material that carried the baraka, the divine blessing or power of the ancient conquered city.
So they looked at it and thought, this looks incredibly powerful, it looks magical, let's put it on the Sultan's tomb to protect him. Even though, if they had bothered to translate it, it would be a total heresy to them.
Exactly. The aesthetic space trumped the theology completely and totally. The stones were preserved and elevated because they were impressive artifacts of power, not because of the actual message they conveyed. The visual awe completely silenced the theological conflict.
Now, there is a story in the notes here about a mufti. Is this a legend, or did this actually happen?
It's a bit of both, but it's a great little anecdote recounted in the sources that illustrates the mindset. The legend goes that Sultan Selim II, Suleiman's successor, eventually noticed these weird stones and asked a mufti, a high-ranking religious scholar, what the Greek words actually said. Now, put yourself in that mufti's shoes. You probably don't know ancient Greek, or if you do, you know it says something intensely Christian. You cannot look the Sultan in the eye and say, hey, just so you know, your dad is buried under a massive monument to Christian dogma.
Oh my God. That is a career-ending move, or honestly, a life-ending move.
Right. So the mufti thinks fast and claims they are the mysteries of Ali, referring to Ali, the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. He basically tells the Sultan, oh, it's deep secret Islamic mystery, Your Majesty, don't worry about it.
He improvised.
He completely bluffed. He claimed the Christian text was esoteric Islamic wisdom just to protect the stones, or more likely, to protect his own neck. But it is a perfect historical example of how meaning is entirely malleable. The physical object stays exactly the same, but the story we tell ourselves about it changes to fit our current political or aesthetic needs.
That is just, I love that so much. It perfectly shows that people will just bend reality to fit the aesthetic they want. If they want to keep the pretty, powerful-looking stones, they will invent a theological reason to justify keeping the pretty stones.
And that bending of reality, that negotiation, brings us right into segment 5. The idea of identity and architecture, how individual people actively used these aesthetic choices to define who they were. It's about blurring the lines. It's about how minority groups navigated this deeply mixed up visual world.
Right, and we're talking about tiraz again, but this time specifically Coptic tiraz.
Right. We touched on luxury textiles earlier, but this is a very specific political application of them. This is Ariel Winnick's research. Tiraz were highly specific inscribed textiles, usually taking the form of robes of honor. In the Islamic world, they were officially distributed by the caliph himself. They had the caliph's name and titles prominently embroidered right onto the bands of the fabric. If you wore one in public, it meant you were in with the in crowd. You actively had the ruler's favor.
Okay, so it's like getting a varsity jacket from the popular team captain.
Right.
Or wearing a branded hoodie from a really exclusive tech company.
Exactly. It was a highly visible marker of political loyalty and status. But here is the fascinating twist. Coptic Christians living in Egypt, who were obviously living as a religious minority under Muslim rule, adopted this exact aesthetic form. They started making their own tiraz.
But they couldn't possibly wear the caliph's name if they were doing their own separate religious thing, right? That would defeat the purpose.
Well, they kept the entire visual language. They kept the distinct bands of writing on the sleeves. They kept the exact layout and colors. But instead of naming the Muslim caliph, their inscriptions named God or Christ, or they used specific Coptic Christian prayers.
Ah, so from 10 feet away, in the street, you look exactly like a loyal, wealthy subject wearing the trendy, officially sanctioned Islamic court fashion. But up close, you are actually reading a Christian prayer.
Precisely. It is all about fitting in while simultaneously standing out. Winnick argues that these Christians were basically inscribing their bodies. They were actively adopting the dominant visual culture because, well, that's just what power and success look like in that society, but they were subtly subverting the text to assert their own specific minority religious identity. It's a brilliant survival strategy. You don't retreat into a cultural shell, you put on the camouflage of the ruling class, but you tweak it just enough for your own community to recognize.
That is so incredibly smart. It is visual code switching again, just like the candlestick. And the sources show it wasn't just happening on their clothes. It was happening in their massive public buildings, too. We have a whole section here on muqarnas.
Muqarnas, yes. If you have ever seen pictures of the Alhambra in Spain, or really any great medieval mosque, you know what muqarnas is. It's that incredibly complex geometric honeycomb vaulting in the domes and arches. It almost looks like stone stalactites hanging down. It is
Yeah.
arguably the single most distinctive, recognizable feature of Islamic architecture. You see a picture of that, you immediately say Islam.
But Richard Pierre and McClary's research found them inside Christian churches.
Yes. Inside Armenian churches and in other Christian buildings in Mosul and across Anatolia. A great example he uses is the Church of the Holy Apostles at Anani.
Now, why on earth would a Christian architect consciously choose to use the literal brand logo of Islamic architecture for their church?
Because to them, it wasn't the brand logo of Islam. It was just the modern style. To be contemporary in the 12th or 13th century, to show your congregation and your rivals that you were on the absolute cutting edge of building technology and high fashion, you used muqarnas vaulting.
So it wasn't viewed as Muslim architecture at all. It was just viewed as modern architecture.
Exactly. We modern people are the ones projecting the strict religious label onto the geometry today. Back then, it was just the incredibly cool, structurally brilliant new way to hold up a roof. It shows that architectural forms were treated as neutral technology, as fashion trends, not strictly as loaded religious symbols. If the engineering works well and it looks beautiful, we're going to use it no matter who invented it.
If it works, use it. That honestly seems to be the overarching motto of this entire era we're looking at. Which brings us to our final major case study in this segment, esoteric spolia in Cairo. And this one involves actual magic, doesn't it?
It really does. This is Sammy Luigi de Gius's research, focusing on the mosque of Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad in Cairo.
So this sultan is building a massive new mosque, and he goes out of his way to import very specific columns, ancient, often Christian or pre-Christian columns, from completely different historical sites to hold up his mosque.
Right. Now, typically older historians would look at that and say, oh, he is physically conquering the past. He is taking their ancient columns and stepping on them to show Islamic dominance, standard empire stuff. But de Giusa argues it is much more nuanced than that. He connects this specific architectural choice to Hermeticism.
Hermeticism,
Yep.
like Hermes, the
Yeah.
Greek god.
Yes, but specifically how he was viewed in the medieval Islamic mind. Hermes Trismegistus was a legendary figure often directly associated with the Quranic prophet Idris. He wasn't just a myth, he was seen as a profound sage, the ultimate source of ancient wisdom, early science, and yes, esoteric magic.
So reusing these very specific ancient columns wasn't just cheap recycling to save stone.
Not at all. It was a highly deliberate attempt to harness that ancient wisdom, to physically harness baraka, which means blessing or spiritual power. By incorporating these specific ancient stones into the very fabric of the mosque, the Sultan was trying to tap into a continuous lineage of power that went back way before Islam, way before Christianity, to the very mythological roots of wisdom itself. It shows that the aesthetic space wasn't just about collecting pretty things, it was about curating powerful things. It was about surrounding yourself with objects that had a palpable, esoteric charge to them.
It really changes how you look at a historic building.
Yeah.
You aren't just looking at a pile of dead rocks. You're looking at a carefully constructed battery of spiritual power, assembled from whatever potent parts they could find across the world.
A battery of spiritual power. I really like that phrasing. That is exactly what they believed it was.
So let's take a breath and look at everything we've covered. We have looked at ceramic bowls, silk textiles, holy oil, book bindings, a hybrid candlestick, misunderstood marble slabs, and magically charged architecture. And the one glaring common thread through all of it is that none of these things stayed in their assigned lane.
None of them. And that perfectly brings us to the synthesis of this whole deep dive, the concept of the new Mediterranean.
Let's bring it all together for the listener. What is the big overarching takeaway from all this microhistory?
The big takeaway is that we fundamentally have to stop looking at maps of battles if we want to actually understand human history. The historians Horden and Purcell talk about this paradigm of fragmentation and connectivity. Yes, the politics of the Mediterranean were deeply fragmented. The religious dogmas were distinct and often violently opposed. But the connectivity, the relentless trade, the shared art, the unstoppable flow of beautiful objects was intense and constant.
It's like looking at a huge dysfunctional family that violently argues at the dinner table about politics, but they still pass the salt and share the same food.
Yes, That's exactly it. Islam and Christianity in the medieval Mediterranean were not just distant neighbors who occasionally waved or shot arrows across a tall fence. They were roommates. They literally shared the furniture. They wore each other's luxury clothes. They ate off each other's shiny plate.
And realizing that, it really humanizes the past, doesn't it? It strips away the grand, impersonal narrative of holy war.
It does. It reminds us that looking closely at a single object, a bowl on a wall, a book on a desk, tells a much truer, more intimate story of human interaction than any royal treaty or grand declaration of war ever could. War is an event, but trade is a life. Art is a life.
War is an event, but art is a life. That is profound, and I think we really need to highlight the significance of this research. Why does this matter for the field of religious studies today?
It matters immensely because it absolutely proves that religions do not exist in hermetically sealed vacuums. They never have. We co-construct our visual and spiritual worlds. Christian art in this period looks the way it does directly because of Islamic art, and vice versa. You cannot untangle the threads of one from the other without destroying the whole tapestry. It forces interfaith understanding by showing that, at our core, we've always been borrowing from each other to define ourselves.
So if we look at the world today, we see a lot of incredibly rigid boundaries. We see a lot of intense us versus them rhetoric everywhere we look.
We do. But this deep dive, to me, raises a really provocative final thought. Think about what we just learned. If a dense Byzantine theological decree, literally defining the Trinity, can end up lovingly protecting a Muslim sultan's tomb.
Right.
And if a distinctly Muslim style of vaulting can be used to hold up the roof of a Christian church just because it looked cool, what modern boundaries that we currently think are rigid and permanent might actually be just as fluid?
That is the ultimate question.
If we looked at our own objects today, our phones, our clothes, our food, the media we consume instead of our angry politics, would we see divided enemies, or would we just see roommates sharing the same space?
I think if we look close enough, we'd see a whole lot of roommates.
I think so too. We're far more connected by what we find beautiful than we are divided by what we believe.
Expert speaker, thank you so much for guiding us through this material. This has been an incredible trip through history.
It was my pleasure entirely. Indeed, beauty is a remarkably powerful thing.
It truly is.
Yeah.
And to you, the listener, the next time you see a piece of art or an old building or even just a complex pattern on a rug in your house, take a second to look closer. Ask yourself, where did this actually come from? And who might have loved this exact same design centuries before me? You might be very surprised by the answer. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We will see you next time.